Is there anything better than a homemade chocolate chip cookie? Just because you're on a grain-free diet doesn't mean you can't enjoy chocolate chip cookies. So today on Kitchen Alchemy, I'm going to show you how to make these delicious grain-free almond flour based chocolate chip cookies that you can whip up in one bowl in about 30 minutes. And I will show you the origins of this recipe from World War II. My cookie ingredients: I have a half cup of butter, half cup of honey, fourth cup of date syrup. I have 1 teaspoon of vanilla and a half teaspoon of lemon juice. For my dry ingredients, I have 2 cups of almond flour, which I will be getting into more about baking in almond flour in a moment, a half cup of coconut flour, half teaspoon baking soda, fourth teaspoon of salt, and for what I will be stirring in, 1 cup of chopped walnuts, 2/3 cup of date sweetened chocolate chips. I would probably use 3/4 cup if I was using it for the full batch. And these are the date sweetened chocolate chips I like to use right here. You can use any chip you like. I almost forgot, there's also 2 eggs in this recipe. I'm going to reserve a little bit of this batch to make without chocolate chips. If you are following strict SCD diet, I have some chopped dates and some chopped pecans here. To get started, I'm just going to cream my butter with my honey and my date syrup. Now I'm going to add my vanilla and my lemon juice and my 2 eggs that I almost forgot. Now I'm going to add my dry ingredients: my almond flour, my coconut flour, my baking soda, and my salt. And then I just like to stir my dry ingredients into the wet ingredients. I don't need a mixer here because this gets pretty thick, but if you have a stand mixer, the paddle attachment works pretty well here. This is nicely combined, so I'm just going to go ahead and stir in all of my walnuts. And I'm going to separate a little bit out here so I can make a no chocolate chip batch. Stirring in my chocolate chip cookies to the main batch. Like I said, I'd probably use 3/4 cup if I hadn't separated some out to leave chocolate chips out of. But for this batch, 2/3 cup is good enough, and you can use whatever amount you like. And now on to the SCD diet batch. I'm just going to stir in my pecans and my chopped dates. And of course, you can use whatever kinds of fillings you like: raisins, other dried fruits, other kinds of nuts. I preheated my oven to 350 degrees and I lined my baking sheet. Here I've got a silicone liner and some parchment paper. Now I'm ready to scoop my dough onto the sheet. I like to use this kind of scooper. It has the handle which will release the dough, making it a lot easier. So I'm just going to scoop these they're like about 1-inch balls, and I'm going to put them a couple inches apart. I'm not sure how much they're going to spread, so we will see how this first batch goes. Just going to get these all lined up on here. There we go. And now they're ready to go into the oven. I'm just going to flatten them out with a spoon real quick first, a little bit, and then they are ready to go into the oven. I'm going to bake these at 350 for 12 to 15 minutes. There are a lot of recipes for almond flour cookies online, but this one I was inspired to create after looking at a recipe from World War II that was based on rationing, that used honey and molasses. And so I was pretty excited to find an old recipe that had honey in it. I loved baked recipes that have honey, so it's a little easier to adapt honey for SCD diet or no refined sugar diets if the recipe is already using a liquid instead of sugar. So I used date syrup, as you saw. You can use all honey if you like. I like the date syrup, as I said, because it gives it a little of that richer flavor. It's a little bit more like using brown sugar or molasses. So that's why I use that, but you don't have to. So what's interesting is that chocolate chip cookies were a staple during World War II, obviously for enjoyment, but they had to come up with a recipe that would go along with the rations, which sugar was rationed and so was butter. Now I use butter because I like the flavor, and the shortening that I would use, the palm shortening, which I used in my previous recipe for the almond flour Oreo style cookies, it's not any cheaper. It's actually more expensive than butter, but you can certainly use that. If you wanted to keep it dairy free, you could also use coconut oil, which will give it a slightly different texture and flavor than butter, but you can, use what fits your likes and needs, of course. Of course, in my version, I'm using almond flour instead of a wheat flour. So things to think about when you have to bake grain-free, you can substitute almond flour 1 for wheat flour, but you have to think about the other ingredients, and that is an important part of baking with almond flour, is that almonds, not only is the texture different, and so that's just a texture difference, but they're very naturally oily. So you have to compensate. So the recipe I was using called for 1 cup of butter. So I only used a half. I cut the butter by half, and in different recipes I might change that even more. Like in a cake recipe, I have actually cut the butter or oil down to 1/3 of what the recipe calls for. Because you want to get that right balance. And so the cookies, we want a little bit more dense than a cake. So that's about the right amount to get the right texture. And you can experiment with your own personal taste on that. You don't want to change it too drastically, but the cool thing about grain-free baking is that you don't need to be as precise with the ingredients as you do in traditional baking with gluten, flour, and sugar, because we're not waiting for any kind of gluten reaction or combination of things. The other thing we have to think about when we're baking with honey is that it is a liquid. It is not like a granulated sugar. So that is going to change the recipe quite a bit. So we have to think about that as we're baking. We don't want it to be too wet. I was pretty happy with the way the dough thickened up as I stirred it. And if you let it sit a little bit, the coconut flour will start to absorb some of that liquid too. I didn't have time to let it sit maybe as much as I could have. I still went out on the sheet totally fine. So I think we're good, but you could let it sit even longer and you'll get even a thicker cookie dough. My cookies are out of the oven. They're still a little bit soft. I let them go a couple of minutes longer, so they actually had a total of about 15 or 16 minutes. It's going to vary by oven. So they might be a little soft on top, but they should not feel raw, and they should be done on the bottom, pretty browned and firm on the bottom. And then I let them cool in the pan for about 5 to 10 minutes and then moved them to this wire rack to cool the rest of the way. Okay, let's take a look at our cookies. They are done, cooled, and I put them in this nice little tin. So they look beautiful. Can't wait to try them. Nice texture, nice color. Just looked like a nice homemade cookie. There's the inside, so it's got that nice cookie crumb. Very nice. Very happy with these cookies. So let's go give them a try. Can't wait to try them out. Wow, so these are so good. They're a little bit soft and crumbly, but when they cool, like a lot of the almond flour stuff, there's not the gluten to bind it. It gets a little crumbly. To get the right flavor, I wanted that combination of the butter and the honey. So there was a little more liquid than I might use for a drier cookie, but it's totally worth it because these have the flavor that I was looking for. It's so satisfying, and the chocolate has that smooth texture, when the chocolate melts when it's baking and then solidifies again. It's so good. There's just something about that. And then I love the crunch of the walnuts that toast a little while they're baking. Perfect chocolate chip cookie. All right, so let's try one of our no chocolate cookies. It looks a bit like the same, especially the dates kind of just look like chips in there, but so I can't really see much from looking at it, but we'll taste it. So these are just as good. I mean, obviously if you want chocolate, the chocolate's going to satisfy that craving, but these are so good too. The cookie itself is a very, very nice flavor and texture, so that's what we're going for, and then you get the fillings that you want. So I put a couple different kinds of nuts and then the chopped dates. The chopped dates are pretty sweet, so you could probably even back off on the honey a little bit if you're going to fill with dates. You could use raisins too, but the dates had the nice, perfect sweetness. I really like these a lot with the dates. So highly recommend using some chopped dates if you're not going to use chocolate chips. It gives that kind of the same smooth texture, and it's got that sweetness, so definitely a good substitute for the chocolate is some chopped dates. Have you made an almond flour chocolate chip cookie before? Let me know in the comments, and let me know if you try these. I'd love to hear what you think of them. See you in the next one.